Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time. We are beginning Masechet Shvuot, not to be confused with the holiday Shavuot. We are speaking about Shevuot, and that means oaths. The oaths that we take generally with God's name, and that is something that we are going to be talking about today. And so we are going to be starting the Masechet. This is our first class of the Masechet. I'm going to give an introduction to the Masechet, and then we are going to review Daf 2 through 6. So as I mentioned, Shvuot are oaths. If you remember, we had mentioned the, sorry, one second. Okay, sorry. So we had mentioned when we were speaking about, if you remember in Masechet Nedarim, we learned about vows. This Masechet speaks about oaths, and we will discuss what the differences are. Not in the beginning of the Masechet though, but I'll tell you in general what we are going to be mentioning. As we know, in the halacha, in the law, we take our speech very seriously, and one can create a prohibition of an activity, right? One could say that they swear they will not eat bread today, or that they will eat bread today, right? So you can create a prohibition, I won't do something, or you can create an obligation, I will do something. You can also use it, an oath, to attest to the truth, right? You can say, I swear that I bought yogurt yesterday from the store, right? Something that already happened in the past. And because we discuss the fact that our language is very powerful, we know that it is very bad if someone swears falsely, right? We have mentioned this in the past as well. There are different types of oaths that one can take. The first is called Shevuot bitui. This is an oath of utterance. Either that I will do something or I won't do something. You cannot do it to somebody else, right? I can't say, right, I swear that you are going to eat bread today. There's no such thing. I can't create an obligation or a prohibition for somebody else. And we're going to learn as well that you cannot take an oath to obligate yourself for something that the Torah already obligates you to do, right? I can't say, I swear I'm going to keep Shabbat. That is already an obligation that you have. So saying that you're obligating yourself is redundant and therefore not okay. You also can't take an oath against it, right? I swear I will not keep Shabbat. That also doesn't work because you are already obligated to keep Shabbat from the Torah. And as we mentioned, you can also make an oath about something that happened in the past, right? That you did do something or that you didn't do something. So that is Shevuot bitui. Shevuot shav is what's called a vain oath. This is not okay. It's when someone takes an oath about something that is impossible. I swear I'm going to fly off the balcony, or taking an oath about something that is self-evident, right? I swear that the sun is going to rise in the morning. These two ideas, either something that's impossible or something that is self-evident, is what's called taking an oath in vain, and there's a prohibition to take this type of oath. Another type of oath is one of testimony, of yediot, right? This we spoke about a lot in Masechet Sanhedrin. This is made by a potential witness, and either, right, and in this sense, they deny knowledge of a certain case, right? You say, oh, right, I know this person was there, he'll testify. And then that person says, I don't know what you're talking about, right? I swear I wasn't there. That's called Shevuot yediot. Now, if they lie, they're going to have to bring a sacrifice because they took an oath in vain. Another type of oath is called Shevuot Pikadon. Shevuot Pikadon is when there's an issue of money, right? It's taken by someone who denies that they owe money. It doesn't necessarily, pikadon literally means deposit, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a deposit. It could be any sort of monetary obligation. Yes, so Ilanit mentions the fact that we usually say bli neder. We're going to see that the difference is a neder is something that it's just a statement. A shvuah is going to entail God's name. So it is very clear that one is either taking or not taking an oath. But for a vow, a neder, it's not always so clear, right? So if I say, right, I'm going to, or I promise I'm going to eat bread tomorrow, I'm going to add bli neder, right? I'm not taking a vow. I'm just saying that I'm going to try really hard to not eat bread tomorrow, or to eat bread tomorrow, as opposed to a shvuah. We're going to see an oath involves God's name, so that's why we don't have a concept of bli shvuah. We're going to have the concept of just bli neder. So, great question. The last thing about the different types of oaths are court-imposed oaths, and that we're going to see later on in the Masechet, where the court can make somebody take an oath based on a certain situation, whether they've admitted to maybe half of the claim or other cases. It's generally imposed on the defendant, and he swears that he is telling the truth, and therefore he does not need to pay. The last thing I'm just going to mention in our introduction is the sacrifice that is brought if one takes an oath in vain, and that is the sacrifice that's called an ole v'yored. Ole means it goes up and it goes down. In modern English, we would call it a sliding scale, which means that this is a type of sin offering that depends on a person's financial situation, and therefore, if someone is very wealthy, they'll bring an animal. If they are poorer, they'll bring a bird. And if they're the poorest, then they'll bring a grain offering. But it's always a sin offering. The question is what is brought as that korban. Okay, we're going to begin the first Mishnah. And actually, the Masechet begins with all the Mishnayot of the Perek, meaning it has the entire chapter's worth of Mishnayot, and then we're going to go through it slowly in the Gemara, right? Usually we just quote one Mishnah, and then we have a Gemara that's going to explain it, and then the next Mishnah, and then the Gemara. This time we're going to get a large section of Mishnah. It's almost the entire first page, which is daf number 2. And then in the Gemara, we're going to explain it. One last one last comment for introduction is that many times in the beginning of a Masechet, we end up speaking about either literary or linguistic ideas before we actually get into the actual topic of the Masechet. So those of you who have been learning for a while, usually when we get to about page 40, the Gemara will say, well, let me tell you what we're talking about in this Masechet, right? Let's talk about the basic idea. So here as well, even though not even though, but though the Masechet is called Shevuot, we are going to spend the first chapter, other than the first, we're going to spend the first chapter not really discussing oaths at all, rather other things that are one could say tangentially related. So you will see we're going to talk about a wide range of things that are going to be connected for certain reasons, and we will see that as we continue. We're going to begin with discussing things that you are going to be liable to bring the korban olev yored, the sacrifice that I mentioned, and those are going to be numerous things, one of which is oaths, but other things as well. Okay, so let's begin on daf 2. Again, as you remember, we always start on daf 2. The idea is that it's always just a continuation of what we've learned in the last Masechet, or as I've heard the beautiful idea that the first page, right, page number 1 is derech eretz, learning to be a good person. Page number 2, now we start learning our Masechet. Okay, so the Mishna tells us oaths are 2 that are really 4. This is a cryptic statement, which the Gemara is going to explain. And because we have, again, if you remember, Mishnayot, a Mishnah is the oral Torah, and it was before it was written down, before it was codified, it was transmitted orally. Because of that, things are going to be concise and matched together thematically. So because we have this interesting characterization of, in Hebrew, it's shtayim shehem arba, 2 that are really 4, the Gemara is now going to mention other things that are also 2 that are really 4. And some of them you have learned already, some of them you have not. Okay, so oaths are 2 that are really 4. What does that mean? So we have, again, as we mentioned, in the future, I will or I won't. Those are the 2. But we can expand it to 4, which is in the past. I did and I didn't. So again, that's 2 that are really 4. Now, the next thing that we are going to mention, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this, is what's called in Hebrew yediot hatumah, knowledge of impurity. This means that we'll talk, the transgression is one who is impure, one who is tameh, is not allowed to enter the temple area, the mikdash, and is also not allowed to eat sanctified foods, right? Kodshim, right? Something that is kadosh, generally sacrificial meat or truma, something that is kadosh, you are not allowed to eat. So this, and you have, the idea is that when you actually did the action, you did not remember something, right? You did it by accident, but you had a knowledge that, and we'll see in a minute, basically either before or after, that you shouldn't have done what you did. When you did it, you didn't realize, right? So again, knowledge of tumah is 2 that is really 4. So again, the option is either you forgot that you were tameh and you went into the temple area, or you ate from the kodshim, from the sanctified food, or you knew that you were impure, but you were walking and talking with your friends and you didn't realize that you walked into the temple area, or you were distracted and you ate a sandwich and you didn't realize that it was a sacrifice meat sandwich and you didn't realize what you were doing. So again, you either forgot that you were impure or you forgot where you were going or what you were doing. Okay, and if that was the case, if this happened, you would be liable to bring a korban olev yored, like we mentioned in the beginning. Okay, something else that's 2, that's 4, is carrying things from one domain to another on Shabbat. Again, is 2, that is 4. What does that mean? Right? If you go from the private domain to the public domain, you can do that in 2 ways. If you remember, it was a long time ago, but in Masechet Shabbat, the Masechet begins where a poor person is standing outside in the public domain and a person is standing in their house in the private domain, and something transfers between the two, right? So either, right, so if we're talking about the first thing, which is going from the private domain to the public domain, so either the person who lives in the house puts something outside into the hand of the poor person, or the poor person reaches his hand into the house and pulls something out. That's shtaim, that's 2. How is it arba? It can go the other way, right? Either, right, the other way is the poor person takes something from outside and puts it into the hands of the person who's sitting in the house, or the person who's inside reaches out and takes something from the hand of the poor person. So again, bringing in from the public domain or bringing out from the private domain, and then either person is doing the action. So another thing, so that was shtaim shehem arba, 2 that are 4. Another thing that's 2 that is 4 is sara'at, leprosy. We read about it last week in the parsha. We're going to again learn more about that in this Masechet. There are 2 main types of sara'at called baheret and se'et. It's 2 different types of lesions, and each one is subdivided. And we'll talk more about those things. When we were talking about the knowledge of the tumah, the Mishna explained that you knew at the beginning that you were impure, and you knew at the end that you did something wrong, but you forgot in the middle. And if that happens, that's when you're going to bring this korban, this sacrifice of the ole v'yored. If you didn't find out at the end, so then the sacrifice of the goat that is sacrificed inside the sanctuary on Yom Kippur is going to suspend the punishment till that person realizes that they did something wrong. Let's say you didn't know at the beginning, but you did know at the end. So then the sacrifice of the musaf, the additional sacrifice that's brought on Yom Kippur is going to atone for the person. This is actually perfect for Parshat Shevuot because this week's Parsha of Achremot talks about the sacrifices that happen on Yom Kippur. So that is exactly what we're talking about. The Mishnah tells us that certain sacrifices are going to atone for certain sins that a person does. Now, we said you need to have some knowledge that something, right, that you were impure, that you did something wrong for the sacrifice to atone for the person. And again, if you didn't have any knowledge that you did something wrong, so then the goats of the 3 major holidays, Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuot, and Rosh Chodesh, those sacrifices, again, on those holidays, we bring a sin offering, a communal sin offering. And the Mishnah tells us that those communal sin offerings will atone for someone who has no knowledge that they transgressed, that they did something wrong. Or maybe not Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh atones for somebody who was pure, but they ate from impure food. And the Shalosh Regalim, again, the holidays, atone for a person who didn't have any knowledge. And Yom Kippur atones for somebody who had partial knowledge, either in the beginning or in the end. But if you had knowledge in the beginning and the end, you're going to bring the Korban Ole V'Yored, as we mentioned before. Okay, let's say it's Yom Kippur and they lost the goat that was supposed to be the sacrifice. Can you just delay it and bring it, let's say, for Sukkot, right? We know that Sukkot comes right after Yom Kippur. Can you use that animal for another communal sin offering? So the Gemara says yes, right? They all come to atone for impurity of the temple, and therefore you can use that animal for another holiday's sin offering. Or, no, maybe Yom Kippur specifically is for everything. Therefore, the Yom Kippur animal can be brought on a holiday. But let's say the Rosh Chodesh animal can be used for Yom Kippur because it's really all about the same general atonement for impurity in the temple. If it was done on purpose, so then the goat that is going to be sacrificed on Yom Kippur is going to atone for that. All other transgressions, if you remember the Seir LaAzazel, the goat that's sent to the desert, that goat is going to atone for all other transgressions that are done throughout the year. Okay, the ox that the Kohen brings, that atones for all of the priests, for all the Kohanim. And as we said, the Seir LaAzazel, that is going to atone for all of Yisrael, for everyone who is not a Kohen. Right, and the blood of the goat is going to atone for Yisrael. So too, the blood of the ox is going to be for the Kohanim. Okay, those were all of the Mishnayot of the first chapter of Shevuot. If you noticed, only the first line was about taking an oath. Everything else is speaking about everything else. So the rest of the chapter is really going to speak, we're going to talk a little bit about oaths, but it's mostly going to be about all these other topics. So if you're excited about oaths, we're going to get there, not today, in a little bit. So now the Gemara asks at the bottom of Daf 2, at the beginning of Daf 3, why is Masechet Shvuot after Makot? Right? Why are we talking about oaths? We just finished talking about lashes. So one reason is that we ended up talking, if you remember at the end of Makot, we spoke about shaving a person's head and a beard, and we were talking about the 2 points, and the 2 points make you liable. So even though you did one action, because it's one that makes you liable for 2, because you cut off 2 peot. Therefore, now we're going to learn about 2 that will make you liable for 4. So again, it's more literary than anything else. And therefore, we have this whole Mishnah about 2 that are really 4. So now, why did we mention all of these things? So the Gemara says that oaths and impurities were written together in the Torah, and therefore we have both of them linked in the verses. And once we started teaching those two, so then we added Shabbat and Tzarat, because we're already talking about two that are four. And we start discussing impurity because it's short, right? So again, if you remember, the Mishnah started speaking about oaths, but the Gemara is now about to talk about the impurity because it's a shorter topic. And then we're going to discuss oaths, which is a much longer topic. But if you wanted to discuss oaths, that's not coming today. But for a minute, right, the Gemara says, what are the two that are four? As we mentioned in the beginning, future, right, two, I will or I won't, and past, I did and I didn't. And we said Shabbat, what were the two that were four? As we mentioned, inside and outside, and the person is standing inside and a person is standing outside. Now, just to speak about oaths for a few minutes, Rabbi Ishmael says that you're only liable for future oaths, right? I will or I won't, not oaths in the past, right? That's something else. Rabbi Akiva says you're only Rabbi Akiva says you're liable for also in the past, and he says you're only liable about eating something that is impure, but not going into the temple when you are impure. So now the Gemara wants to understand who is our Mishnah according to, because it seems to have both opinions, and because it didn't say these are two separate people's opinions, the Gemara is going to try to understand who is our Mishnah according to. So one opinion is that it's really like both of them, right? Some are liable and some are exempt, meaning when we said shtayim shehem arba, two that are four, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're liable for all four, but there are four different scenarios. But that doesn't seem to be consistent, because when we speak about tzarat, those are four different types of tzarat, and therefore that can't be that our Mishnah is talking about some things that are liable and some things that are exempt. Rather, our Mishnah must be like Rabbi Ishmael, and it's teaching us that you will be liable for lashes, but not for a sacrifice for all four of these things, right? Maybe, right, in the past, you get lashes because you lied. In the future, right, let's say you say, I won't eat, and then you did, okay, I can understand that you would get lashes because you did something, you did an action. But if you take an oath, I'm going to eat bread tomorrow, and then you didn't eat bread, right? You didn't do an action. How could you get lashes? If you remember, we learned in the last Masechet that you're not going to get lashes for something that you didn't do, right? If there was no action, you don't get lashes. So the Gemara says, no. Rabbi Ishmael says that you can get lashes even if there is no action, right? Because again, you said you were going to do something, you didn't do it, you should get lashes. Or you do not get lashes, not because there's no action, but because you couldn't have gotten proper warning, right? Again, if you remember from the last Masechet, we spoke a lot about warning, right? I tell a person, don't do that, because if you do it, this is going to be the consequence. Now, I can't do that for the negative, right? If I say, right, I'm going to eat bread, I can't walk around all day tomorrow and say, don't eat bread, don't eat bread, don't eat bread, right? Meaning, meaning you're saying that you're going to do something. There's no way to warn for something that you're not going to do, right? The idea is you just didn't eat bread all day. How can someone warn someone to not eat bread? It doesn't work. And therefore, right, again, right, that it doesn't work when you get a warning for something that you're not going to do, right? So an example of this is that you don't get lashes for leaving out for leaving over meat of the Korban Pesach, because again, I can't, if I just say, don't leave it over, you're not doing any action right now. Therefore, that's not proper warning. Or the Gemara says maybe that case is different, because if you remember in the last Masechet, we mentioned that Korban Pesach is unique in that it is a negative commandment that's followed by a positive commandment. And that's the reason that you don't get lashes. But maybe otherwise, in another type of transgression, you could get lashes, even if there is no action. Let's say a person says, I won't eat this bread. And then he says again, I won't eat this bread, or he swears that he won't do it. You're only liable for one oath. Again, that's called a Shevuot bitui, and you get lashes if you do it on purpose. Daf 4 tells us if he says, I'm going to eat it, and then he didn't, again, as we said, because there's no action, the person does not get lashes. Okay, our Mishnah deals, so we said that maybe our Mishnah is dealing with a person who gets lashes. Therefore, right, what would that have to do with tzarat? Tzarat is leprosy. That has nothing to do with lashes. So the Gemara explains, maybe we're talking about if a person cut off a lesion, right? They cut off the tzarat, which you're not allowed to do. If you cut it off, you would get lashes. Same thing with carrying out on Shabbat. You could get lashes, even if you were warned that you could get the death penalty in the court. And as we saw in the last Masechet, this is a machloket if that warning works. Okay, now let's go to this concept of knowledge of the knowledge of warning as opposed to awareness. If you remember, we had originally interpreted the Mishnah speaking about an awareness. A person was aware that they were impure, then they forgot, and then they were aware again. So one opinion is maybe we're talking about there was some sort of warning, right? Because if we're talking about lashes, then you have to have some warning. But then the Gemara says, no, it can't be that our Mishnah is talking about lashes. Rather, it's talking about the awareness, the way we defined it in the beginning, that we're talking about an awareness of the person knowing that they were impure. And therefore, our Mishnah is according to Rebbe. Rebbe is the way we call Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And he holds like Rabbi Yishmael and like Rabbi Akiva in two separate things. And therefore, it's all according to Rebbe, but it's like the two opinions of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. The Gemara here now brings up a form of understanding verses in the Torah. For those of you who are familiar, there's a list in your Sidur right before Baruch She'amar in the morning prayers. There is a list of 13 ways that we can understand the Torah, 13 principles, 13 rules for understanding the Torah. And we use a lot of them. And one of them, or two of them that the Gemara mentions here on Daf 4, the first one is called Klal Prat Klal, which means when we look at a verse and the beginning of the verse or a part of the verse is a generalization, then we have, right, Klal means a generalization, Prat means a specification, and then Klal, another generalization. That is called Klal Prat Klal. That is one way to interpret a verse. Another way to interpret the verse is something called Ribui, Miut, Ribui. Now, literally, the words seem very similar. Ribui means an expansion. Miut means like a concentration. And then ribui, again, an expansion. Now, why do we use these terms? We're going to understand verses or mitzvot differently based on which principle you're going to use. So the Gemara explains, as we mentioned, we have two different Tanaim, two different schools of thought, Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara tells us that right, we know that Rabbi Akiva uses ribui and miut, and Rabbi Yishmael usually uses klal uprat. And again, we're going to see how we understand verses using these two principles. So the Gemara gives an example, and the Gemara is trying to understand, does Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi use ribui and miut or klal and prat? So here the Gemara says, let's go to the concept of pidyon haben, right? A parent, a father is obligated to redeem his firstborn son if certain things, right, certain variables align. You need to redeem your firstborn son with, the Torah says, with 5 shekel silver coins. So if you use ribui, so then you can use anything that has a certain value, like the 5 coins, but you're not allowed to use documents. Meaning ribui and miut will allow, it's much more inclusive, it will allow more things to be used, it only excludes documents. However, if you use klal prat klal, so then it excludes more things. It'll exclude things like slaves, documents, and land, right? So depending on which principle you use, there are going to be practical differences to how you understand the verse. So the Gemara tells us that Rebbe uses ribui and miut, but in another Braita, we actually see that Rebbe uses klal uprat, right? And generally, the schools of thought were consistent. They either used one or the other. So the Gemara says that another example was, if you remember, we learned that a Jewish slave, right, as someone who is sold into slavery because of a debt, goes free after 6 years of work. On the 7th year, they go free. And let's say the Jew says, I really love it here. I have nowhere to go. I want to stay. So then the master takes the Jewish slave and he pierces his ear. Exactly, right? He pierces his ear. Now, the Torah tells us that you pierce the ear with a martseya. Martseya is an awl, A-W-L, right? A sharp metal object. So now, again, based on which principle you use, you can either, right, only use the martseya, right? So you can either use anything else, right? Anything that's sharp, like the martseya, anything that's sharp, or right, Rebbe says, no, you can only use things that are metal, like the martseya, because he uses klal and prat. Therefore, it's more limiting. So the Gemara says, you're right. On Daf 5, you're right. Usually, Rebbe uses klal and prat, but sometimes he uses ribui and miut. And therefore, it depends on the context. And therefore, with oaths, Rebbe goes like according to Rabbi Akiva, and not like what he usually would the way he would normally understand the verses. Okay, back to our concept of awareness of impurity. So it says in the verse, it was concealed. So what does it was concealed mean? It says it twice. So the Gemara tells us this shows that you needed to have knowledge before, right? And then it became concealed. And then you had knowledge after, right? Meaning there needed to be knowledge before and after. And if that is the case, then you'd be liable to bring the korban oleh v'yored. Or maybe when it says the word ne'elam, right? It was right. You forgot, or it was concealed, and he didn't know. That's how you understand that you need knowledge before and after. But was concealed, maybe that teaches that if you forgot where the temple is, or that this food is sanctified, you would also be liable. And again, the Gemara explains when it says it was concealed, it means that you knew beforehand. Then the Gemara says, wait a minute. We have other places in the Torah where it says was concealed, and it doesn't mean that they knew beforehand. We have it with Sotah. If you remember, Sotah was the wife who is suspected of having an affair, and it says that right, v'ne'elam, it was concealed from her husband. Does that mean he knew before? No, it can't be that he knew before, right? He doesn't know. That's the whole point. So the Gemara says you're right. Or the Gemara says maybe, right, when is this original knowledge? It's that he learned as a child that you're not allowed to go into the temple when you are impure. It doesn't mean that in this case, he knew that he was impure and he shouldn't go into the temple. But the Gemara says, wait a minute. So then how can you, if you're going to say, oh, every child learns it when they're young, how could you ever have a case of someone who didn't know if you're going to tell me that every child learns it? So the Gemara says, maybe the child grew up in a non-Jewish environment, didn't go to Jewish day school, therefore they never learned it. And that's how they don't have awareness beforehand. Okay, we're going to leave that for now. Let's talk about Shabbat. We had mentioned in Shabbat that there are two that are really for. Remember, we said inside, and two that are really for outside. But here, right, we're only talking about one set, meaning these are the again, we're going to show you, we're going to say that there are general categories and subcategories. But here we're talking about general categories. So the Gemara says, right, what are the general categories? What are the avot? Those are yediot, things that you take out. From inside, you take them out. Again, maybe two are liable and two are exempt. The Gemara says, no, we have to have a case where all four situations are liable. And therefore, again, the Mishnah uses the word yediot, which literally means to go out. That implies you're taking something from inside, from the private domain, and taking it outside. But the Gemara says another yetziah is what we would call in Hebrew hachnasa, bringing something from the outside in, right? Lahachnis, to bring in. And those, right, and the Gemara says, even though we're using the word yetziah to mean to take out, it can also include things that you bring in, right? We would normally say transferring something from one domain to another. It doesn't matter if it's going in or out. That doesn't really matter. And now we're going to talk about tzarat. Okay, so tzarat, as we read in last week's parsha, tzarat is a spiritual illness that has physical manifestations, right? It has lesions, and there are different types of lesions. So baheret means that it's white. and some are other categories are the colors of snow and wool. So we're going to see there are 4 white colors. 2 are avot, 2 are general categories, and 2 are subcategories. So the 2 avot, the 2 main categories are baheret, which is like snow, that's the whitest, se'et, which is the color of wool, right? So wool is a little off-white. Again, we'll talk about what wool in a minute. And then the subcategory of baheret, of the snow, is the color of lime, right, that they used in the temple. And the subcategory of se'et, which is the wool, is the color of the egg whites. So it's a little like less we mentioned. So if you put it in order, we're going to have snow. We'll call it number 1 is snow. Number 2 is wool. Number 3 is lime, like what you put on walls. And in Hebrew it's called seed. And number 4 is the egg, like the egg whites. So those are the 4 different colors. And there are different opinions on if you can combine different colors. So there are going to be 2 opinions on how they can combine. Either the Av and the Tolada, meaning the general category and then the subcategory. So that would be number 1 and 3 and 2 and 4. Or it's going to be colors that are next to each other, right? 1 with 2, 2 with 3, 3 with 4, right? So those are 2 different opinions on how the colors can combine in different lesions. So those are the 2 different opinions. And we need a Kohen, right? The priest is the expert. He needs to be an expert in seeing these lesions. He has to know the names of each one. So he has to know the names of each one and the exact color. Another way that they describe the color, so remember we had snow, wool, lime, and egg yolk. Another opinion is if you would take milk. So the Gemara says you take 4 cups of milk and you put different numbers of drops of blood in each, sounds gross, but in each cup of milk. And then, right, the white is going to change, right? It's going to be less white. And that's like how you can understand the different colors. And then the Gemara talks about each type of lesion. So baheret, that's the one that was snow. That's the whitest. And it's a very deep white. And what does that mean, deep? It actually looks like it's depressed in the skin because it's surrounded by a darker color. It looks like it's deeper in. Se'et, which is number 2, is raised, or it looks like it's raised. Its subcategory is called sapachat, and right from the word like sepach, it's secondary. And baheret also has a second, like a subcategory. We said se'et is like white wool. What does that mean, white wool? It is clean, and it's the wool from a day-old sheep that was cleaned by its mother and then covered. So it stays very white. But again, it's not that bright white of snow. And the Gemara comes up with 2 different parables of how we understand the different types of tzarat, how they can combine, right? So one mashal is to kings and seconds in command, right? There are 2 kings and 2 seconds in command, right? So that's like the 2 avot, and then right the 2 general categories followed by the 2 subcategories. The Gemara says, oh, we're talking about two different kings, right? Who is stronger, the Caesar or the Persian king? And in the Gemara, they're like, oh, we're not sure. And they're like, what do you mean you're not sure? And they say, well, we live in Persia. Obviously, the Caesar of Rome is more powerful, but we can't in Persia say that the Caesar is more powerful. But the idea is that there are bright white, right, two main categories, and then two subcategories. With that, we are going to finish tonight's class. And if anybody has any questions, we have a few minutes. I see Ilanit wrote. Yeah, interesting. Ilanit is asking about Yishmael. We do have numerous Rabbi Yishmael. So it's a great question. Some see it as, he does do tshuva at the end of his life. He does repent. And so maybe, there is some positivity to his character, but Rabbi Yishmael, definitely, we see him a lot in the Gemara, in the Mishna, in the Gemara. So maybe they're naming after that. Yes, any questions? Yes.
How about a statement? I can tell we're in a different portion of the Talmud. First of all, there was about 10 times much Hebrew. I can't ask a question. But you know what? It'll get easier as we start repeating things. So I've come to.
Did I not translate something? If I
didn't, at the speed that you translate. But you know that thing about the egg whites? They should have mentioned that they were cooking it, because I understand why they're looking at raw egg whites. But if you cook them, they're white as snow.
Yes. So someone just asked, it's not egg yolk, it's egg white.
Yeah.
It's a great question if it's cooked or uncooked.
Or beaten up.
Right, or whipped, right? Maybe. I'm not sure. Let's see if the Gemara next week we will.
I would imagine is like when you're starting to whip it, it's a little bit frothy. That's the color that they mean. That's my imagination. I don't know if it's true or not.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. It's a great question.
What did you say?
That when you start whipping it up, the egg whites, they become a little frothy. So it's
because of the movement. It picks up
translucent, oxygen. But it's a little bit of white, but not a strong white, because once you fully whip it, it's a stronger white.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, Naomi's asking not the shell. No, I don't think it's the shell. Krum beitza was the way they used it. So I don't think it's the shell. No. Okay. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom. And Ezrat Hashem, we will meet. Yes, I'm sorry, it was a little complicated. I think whenever we speak about purity and impurity in the temple, it gets a little complicated. But we will get to oaths very soon. Just not yet.
I just want to make a comment. Ilanit, kol hakavod, your questions are spot on. It's just like I love your questions. And your questions and your comments. Yes, thank you.
I just want to thank you.
Beautiful to hear that encouragement. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
I just want to thank you for your excellent summary. It's you did such a wonderful job.
Amazing.
A lot of comprehensive stuff.
Absolutely.
And I'm also amazed they fit in such a small amount of time, a short amount of time. It's very impressive. Standing ovation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.